Segment 2, Lake Country Culture Shock. When I moved from Detroit to Texas, I was 9 years old, fresh out of the chaos of suburban Detroit, a little town called Berkeley. I was a BMX kid, a skater kid, a daydreamer kid. I lived on a steady diet of BMX Plus magazine, Boys Life, cartoons, and whatever music my older siblings smuggled into my brain. Run DMC, Queen, Michael Jackson, Van Halen, Beastie Boys, Motley Crue, the stuff you crank loud enough to vibrate the paint off a Ford Tempo. Then I got dropped into Lake Country Christian School because my uncle helped found it, funded it, and played the part of respected board president. My parents figured, sure, why not? Family's there, better opportunities, safer neighborhood, and on paper, that made sense. But in reality, it was like getting teleported from The Breakfast Club straight into a low-budget sequel to The Children of the Corn. See, I grew up around holiday-only Lutheranism. Christmas Eve service, maybe Easter if Mom felt guilty. We weren't deeply religious. We were normal Midwest, don't be an asshole and help your neighbors religious. Nobody ever asked me if I accepted Jesus into my heart. Nobody ever tried to scare me with hellfire. Nobody ever told me cartoons were demonic. I didn't even know evangelicals were a thing. So imagine 9-year-old me, hyper-observant, already wired to scan every room for bullshit, walking into a place where kids my age were asking if I was saved before they even knew my name. These kids were serious. They'd say things like, if Jesus came back today, would you go with him or would you burn? And I'm standing there thinking, lady, I just learned long division. I'm not ready to discuss my eternal destiny. The culture shock hit me like a freight train. Texas was already its own planet to a Detroit kid, but this was a whole ecosystem of Reagan worship, cowboy Christianity, and adults who talked about the Rapture like it was scheduled for next Tuesday. And all of this was happening during the full-blown satanic panic of the 1980s. You know the era. The moral majority was seeing devils in everything. Rock music, the mall, cartoons, playgrounds, Cabbage Patch Kids, your imagination, and probably your breakfast cereal. At Lake Country, they told us the Smurfs were satanic. He-Man was satanic. Dungeons and Dragons opened spiritual doorways. Cabbage Patch Kids were demonically inspired. And don't even think about watching MTV. Meanwhile, outside of school, my sister is driving me around blasting Run DMC, Van Halen, and Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil. Not ironically. Not in rebellion. Just because those songs were bangers. And I loved every second of it. It was oxygen. It was proof that the world wasn't actually on fire because of a cartoon wizard or a blue mushroom guy. Now add another layer on top of all of this. Remember my uncle? The same guy warning the world about moral decay and the evils of secular culture? The guy who stood at the front of the church talking about righteousness and purity? The guy who funded the school with dirty money? He was also the same guy running the business operations that didn't exactly stand up to forensic accounting. Republican-leaning Texas businessmen in a three-piece suit. Praise the Lord in the morning, cut corners in the afternoon, and fly private on the weekends. All while telling the world that cartoons and rock music were the real threat to civilization. It didn't add up, and because of how my brain works, I couldn't let it go. Growing up neurodivergent meant I noticed every discrepancy, every contradiction, every adult saying one thing and doing another. I didn't have the social filter to gloss over hypocrisy. I didn't have the ability to just go along. My whole wiring is based around pattern recognition and calling out nonsense when the pattern doesn't make sense. So while other kids were buying into the fear, the fire and brimstone vibes, I was sitting there thinking, why are we worried about Gargamel summoning demons when my uncle is literally being indicted for real crimes? It created this weird dual identity in me. Half creative kid shaped by music and magazines and counterculture, half sarcastic skeptic shaped by watching grown adults freak out about Smurfs while quietly committing fraud on the weekends. And all of it, every bit of it, shaped my humor, my personality, my mistrust of authority, and my tendency to smell bullshit from 3 counties away. That was the moment my Gen X mind was basically born. right there in a Fort Worth classroom, surrounded by the sons and daughters of Texas business dynasties, the Grubbs Auto family, Al Banker's punk kid, even the children of televangelist James Robeson. Meanwhile, I'm the Detroit kid in the back row holding a Trapper Keeper with a Metallica doodle on it, listening to Suicidal Tendencies cassettes, trying to figure out how cartoons and rock music became evidence in a spiritual murder trial. This is where the sarcasm came from. This is where the skepticism turned into survival skill. It wasn't rebellion. It was self-defense. And honestly, it stuck. I didn't know it then, but this was the first time I realized adults didn't always know what the hell they were talking about. That was my introduction to Texas. A 9-year-old kid from the suburbs of Detroit suddenly dropped into a world where everybody talked about Jesus like he was running for class president, and every toy I loved was apparently a demonic plot. Meanwhile, the adults were out there living like Gordon Gekko with a Bible on the dashboard. It was confusing as hell. And look, I didn't have the language for it back then. Being on the spectrum meant my bullshit radar was basically military grade. I could spot hypocrisy at 30 miles, even if I didn't know what to do with it. Kids around me were buying into every fire and brimstone story. Honestly, the whole thing felt like living inside of a live-action morality play, written by someone who'd never met a real child or listened to a real song. They preached salvation while practicing creative accounting. They warned us about Satan while quietly building their own personal kingdoms. And there I was, stuck in the middle. It gave me a story. And it made me realize early on that if you want the truth, you're going to have to go digging for it yourself. Because the people holding the microphone aren't always the ones telling it. So as we wrap this segment, here's the thought I keep circling back to. For all the chaos, for all of the hypocrisy, for all of the fear that they tried to sell us, the thing that actually saved me wasn't religion or rules or warnings or fear about the end of the world. It was the ability to look at all of it and say, yeah, I don't think so. And that, my friends, might be the most Gen X thing about me. More to come on Confessions of a Gen X Mind. Thanks for listening.